Tegan was sure that there must be something to like about Turlough, but she couldn't think what. It wasn't his age, it wasn't his looks, it wasn't anything that she could name, but as they walked down the TARDIS corridor, his presence behind her gave Tegan a creepy feeling between the shoulders. It was like stories she'd heard of travellers back home in the Australian bush. They'd get the same crawling sensation and look down to see a snake about to strike. "These are all storerooms," she said, gesturing at a set of doors she was certain she'd never seen before, and she carried on past before Turlough could ask any awkward questions. "Just give him the tour, Tegan," the doctor had said. "You know your way around by now." And she was left in the position of either tackling the job or else arguing for her own incompetence, which she wasn't going to do, not in front of the brat. Her assessment of Turlough was such that she'd trust him to store up the admission and use it to embarrass her sometime. It was about the only thing she'd trust him for. At the next intersection, she stopped and glanced back. Turlough was looking the doors over, as if he was weighing up whether or not to believe her. In the cool grey light of the timeless corridors, he looked serene, almost angelic, but when he caught her eye and smiled, there was a glint of something hard and unpleasant under the surface. If the doctor looked for long enough, he'd probably see it as well. But then he'd never had reason to, and on the couple of occasions when she and Nyssa had tried to describe their doubts, he'd dismissed them. Reservations about a new companion in the TARDIS could so easily look like a display of petty jealousy, and when the doctor was around, Turlough's act was very, very good. He sauntered along slowly to catch up, and Tegan turned the corner. She saw, with relief, that at last they were coming into an area she recognised. Not only was so much of the TARDIS unfamiliar, she was convinced that parts of the craft quietly redesigned themselves when no one was looking. Through this open area and out the other side, and they'd come to the corridor with the main living areas. She slowed so that Turlough could make up the distance. He didn't hurry. Something else that had unsettled her. Turlough was no primitive, but there had been nothing in his background to prepare him for the intellectual and sensual shock of entering a craft containing the floor plan of a mansion in an external package the size of an old Earth police telephone box. So why was he taking it all so calmly? "Well," she said as they reached the living space, "that's the layout." She tried not to sound too relieved at making it back. "It goes on forever," Turlough said politely, as if he was thanking an aunt for a present. But he ought to be standing there with his mouth hanging open and his mind completely blown, Tegan thought. "It can seem like it," she said. "It's best if you don't go wandering until you know your way around. How am I supposed to manage? Give me a call." That's a joke, she thought, and pointed across the corridor to the door of the room that she shared with Nyssa. "Most of the time I'll be over there. Don't I get a room?" "I was coming to that next." Well, to be honest, she'd been putting it off for as long as she could. She led him down to another of the doors and touched for it to open. "This one isn't being used," she said delicately. Turlough went through and stood in the middle of the room looking around. Tegan hesitated for a moment before she followed. This was Adric's old room. Nothing inside had been touched or moved since they'd lost him. She could understand that it was only fair to let Turlough have somewhere that was within easy distance of the console room and the social areas, but why did it have to be here? She knew the answer, of course, that the pain was a necessary part of the healing, but it didn't make her feel any better. "It looks like a kid's room," Turlough said. Tegan did her best to keep the anger out of her voice. She almost succeeded. "It was Adric's." "Who?" "It doesn't matter, but he wasn't a child." Turlough barely seemed to have noticed. "I've had enough of children," he said. "What with that awful school on Earth."